Welcome to the Elizabeth Farm Podcast, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please like, rate, and subscribe.
Well, welcome back to the Elizabeth Farm Podcast, everyone. This is episode 4, and super excited today to have Jonathan Cobb on. He's a good friend and does some amazing work in the community, so I'll give him an opportunity to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what he and his family do. And so Jonathan, if you want to just introduce and
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
I grew up east of Temple, far east, Bell County. I'm fourth generation on our land. My great-grandparents moved the family to that spot in 1902. And my dad was the youngest, so my grandfather was actually born in 1898. So fourth generation, but probably there's enough years there to be 5 generations, but grew up on that farm. I'll get into that later, but it kind of took the path of the American farm, from diverse, sustaining farm for a family, selling the excess proceeds, to monoculture and very industrialized through the years. But when I left for college, very much in the same mindset that we'd been taught of, there's nothing good here, you gotta leave, go get an education, find a better life. And I don't think that's just agricultural people that are taught that. I think it's anybody in a smaller town or city. There's always something better to go searching for out there, which is a lie. But so I followed that to school, dropped out a few times, struggled through school, finally got my degree after 7 years of trying, and it's not a doctorate. And got a degree in marketing, met my wife in school, which is great. Best thing ever. And we moved to Fort Worth after both of our graduations. Never thought I would move back to the farm, never thought there was a opportunity there in agriculture for us, or didn't really think I had the desire for that. And that was like 2003, and my degree was in marketing, and that was during an economic recession, and I couldn't find work. Struggled with depression during that time of not finding work. Thankfully, my wife was blessed with a good job, and we had a good life there in Fort Worth. I eventually started a landscape design business and started doing that for a while, and then came back to help my dad with harvest. I think that would have been like 2006, because he had needed some extra help with harvest. He was farming about 2,500 acres or something like that at the time, and I just kind of missed some of that, I guess. I think a lot of it was more romantic notions in my mind of the growing up childhood side, because in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, there still was a lot of family aspects to it. It was industrialized, but a little less. It still took a lot of people to do the work. And so there was that camaraderie there. We ate a lot of dinners on the back of a pickup, watching sunsets and stuff like that I missed. And I knew getting into that model was going to be impossible if my dad was out before we decided to try to cut back into it, because that model would have taken millions of dollars to get into, equipment-wise, operation loans and things like that. So it would have been out of reach. So it was kind of tugging at me. I went back home, and Kaylin and I talked about possibility of moving back. And so she was supportive of that, and we put our house on the market in Fort Worth, and she found a job down here. She's a CPA. We moved to downtown Temple, and I was commuting out to the farm, working with my dad. I feel like I'm going on and on without you getting a chance to ask.
Oh, no,
Keep going.
you're good. Absolutely.
And that would have been 2007. So I moved back and was working with Dad. Basically what it boiled down to, because of where the farm had gone to in all of its advancements, was I was piloting a machine. So it had auto steer and all of the stuff. So I would turn it on the end, push a button, it would drive to the other end, turn around, push a button. There was a little more to it than that, but it was pretty dull, covering a lot of ground really fast, a lot of high stress because there was a lot of money on the line for timeliness, and trying to fit nature into our window and our time frame was very stressful. And both of us having business degrees, we saw pretty quickly that the business model was not really very stable. It relied a lot on subsidies and insurance to keep it. If you took all that away, it wasn't a very good business model. And so that kind of concerned us. But then also during that same time frame, paralleling that, we were having some health issues and looking more into what we were eating and how our food was affecting our health. And also paralleling that time frame, I was late to come around to podcast, ironically. Here we are. But I discovered there were these things called podcasts around 2009 or so. And my
for sure.
My brother-in-law had an old iPhone 1 that had basically become a giant, what they call those iPods that just stored like MP3s. So I downloaded a bunch of sermons, and then I discovered iTunes U, and basically I had started reading then. I didn't read ever through college either. Like the first book I read cover to cover, I was 30 years old. But then read Mere Christianity and then The Reason for God. And God was really just reforming me then. So the blessing of being in a glass box for 12, 15-hour days at times, I got to listen to a lot of stuff and just was like absorbing it like a sponge. So I listened to hours and hours of theological podcasts. And so one in particular was a sermon by Tim Keller. I believe he preached it in 2009, called Can Faith Be Green? And in that, he gave a defense for Christianity as being the greatest reason for environmentalism and care for creation, and headed that up with a paper by a guy named Lynn White that was a professor of medieval studies, I believe, or something like that. It was written in the 70s, and it basically was saying Christianity is to blame for all of our environmental troubles because Christians don't care for the earth, because they, and rightly so, I think, because unfortunately, a lot, I grew up kind of this way. It was more of a Platonic view of creation, that it's all kind of bad and God's going to destroy it and burn it all up and then we're going to start over, instead of a view of creation that God created it, it was good, he was pleased with it, it didn't fall, we fell, so we're the broken part that needs redemption, and he's going to recreate everything eventually to completion. So we get to work towards that as ambassadors, in the same way that we do with human to human broken relationships. We get to try and heal the world. We won't do it until he returns, but we get to work towards it. And so that was just a mind-blowing watershed moment for me that changed the way I viewed creation. So then that created this like schism between what I was doing in the fields and what I really was believing, and then also what we were eating. We weren't producing anything. 3,000 acres, we weren't producing anything that we would eat. And I didn't know what to do about that. So I was just kind of going through the motions, working for Dad, probably from like 2008 till 2011. And then the big drought of 2011 came, and that was kind of like, okay, maybe God's trying to tell us this isn't, maybe this is the answer. Like he's closing the book there. And we were looking at moving to Austin. I had gotten to know several church planners down there at the time, and one of them in particular, his church had a lot of homeless community involved in that. So he was in relation with Mobile Loaves and Fishes down there whenever they were starting to kind of think through the idea of their community. And so I was thinking more on food then. It was still agriculture related, but it was more like direct human consumption type food. Praying about that. And then our house wouldn't sell. Like, it was on the market for a long time. And then there was a meeting of with the NRCS. It's part of USDA. They had been studying some of the stuff we were doing on the farm, because we were doing some conservation tillage and reduction of fertilizer use and things like that with precision agriculture. But they had a meeting and they had tested our soils and they wanted to show us the results of that. That's all I thought it was, but it turns out it was like a big training day and we were stuck there all day. But I was tired of looking for work. I was having a hard time finding a job again.
Yeah.
And so I went to this meeting, and the meeting was a presentation trying to train their employees on what was then this new movement around soil health. It was before regenerative was a buzzword. And this was November of 11. And so Ray Archuleta was a guy that they brought in from National that was speaking, along with, at the time, the state agronomist, Willie Durham. And they were talking about soil health and giving this presentation. And I was like, I grew up in agriculture and around it, and we've been to all kinds of meetings where the experts were supposedly telling us how to grow better crops, and never once was anything ever explained like that the soil was living and alive and functions well when cared for well. And so that was I was wrestling with God that day, like, because I should back up a little bit. So I had already talked to my dad at that point that summer, which was a very emotional and hard thing to get to, because I'm fourth generation. I have siblings, but none of us were back. So it was dying with dad. Like, he was going to be the last generation. And they were so happy that we were back that it was like, man, it's going to be heartbreaking to have to sit down and say it's not going to work and we're going to leave. And it took like a couple of months, really. It's kind of dumb, but I guess guys are that way sometimes. Like, there were times that I would sit with him and it's like, I should talk to him, but I didn't do it. But then the right time came and I did. So that had already been crossed, and my brain and my wife's brain were already like totally shifted to Austin.
Yeah.
And so there's all this stuff and I'm like intrigued by it. And by lunchtime, I was like, this is important. Like, this movement's really important. And I think I'm supposed to be a part of it. But I was like, God, what are you doing? Because I don't want to stay here. Like, I'm already shifted to that life and stuff. And but after that, Ray and I hit it off. I talked to him after the meeting. He wasn't allowed to say much about his faith because he was a government employee at the time, but I could tell. And so we talked afterwards, and he's been like a brother to me since then, and mentor, and invited me into the inner circle of regeneration at the time. And I've met some great mentors since then, but that was kind of the turning points around that 2008 to 11 that really shifted. I'll go back to that sermon though, really, of changing my worldview of creation and caring for it. Where those tie together is from 2008, I knew that there should be a better way, but I didn't know that it existed. And so I thought, I have to get out of scaled up agriculture to do anything like what I would feel better about. I didn't know there was an alternative until I met Ray and these other guys that were doing these things at a large scale, and following it with the science and really just proving that there was a better way to do these things, from small scale to large, like the whole way, like it works in all the context. And it does because God created it to work that way. Not that it doesn't take work, because it's really broken. so that's where that ties together. And since then, it's just been a journey, adapting to what comes and what we learn. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned, which if you want to dive a little deeper into this, being a man of God, just seeing the different way to do things, whether it's the buzzword of regeneration or just looking at all of creation in a different way, how God made it, the systems he put in place. How is that, one, I guess, how did your relationship with the Lord start? And then two, how has that come to change your mindset on all of life? Like, do you see everything in a different way now? Is it just, oh, I'm farming this different way, which it sounds like that's not the case, but maybe dive in a little to that and just say, how God has changed your life through agriculture. And then not to add, once again, the ADHD, but not to add too much, but going off of that, how that can help the community, how that helps people, right? Instead of just saying, oh, this is one way to do it, saying, oh no, this can change lives. This can, better not only the soil and the earth, but God's greatest creation in humanity. And just let me know if I asked everything in a correct manner, but
that may be a good segue to, so there's one of the authors that became really influential to me as well, is Wendell Berry. And so there's a quote, I can't remember which book it was out of, but it goes like this, and I'm going to read it so I don't butcher it. But it's, we have the world to live in on the condition that we will take good care of it. And to take good care of it, we have to know it. And to know it and be willing to take care of it, we have to love it. And so that was really profound to me. We actually have that in our shop, to try to remember. And my wallet says love, no care on it. I was able to speak at a conference several years ago, and I kind of centered my talk around, it was an agricultural conference, but the title of my talk was "What's Love Got to Do with It?" And it really does all turn on affection. That's something that Wendell speaks of a lot. So to kind of reorder that in a regenerative cycle is, and I used an example of a relationship with my wife. So I was attracted to her first, and then so I had some affection, and that caused me to want to know her. And as I did, I was able to know how to care for her, what she liked, what her interests were. And that made me love her more. And it made me want to know her more. And it made me care for her better. And that's like a regenerative loop. And so the same applies for everything, like friendships, creation care. So if I allow myself to have affection for creation, which I think is probably a big step for a lot of us, to actually go, what stirs my affections when I walk the land or whenever I see things, and then meditate on that and go, okay, if this is beautiful and I love it, what are the things about it that I can know? And then with the thought of how can I better take care of it? So you learn to start listening. And that's really kind of a paradigm shift there, that God used that, to stir that affection loop in there. And he loved us and care, he knows, all knowing, so he can care for us properly, as we need to. I think it just works in there really well. And then, gosh, there's so many things. I mean, with agriculture, like, I tell friends at church about this a lot, that like we all depend on the rain. Like if you really play it out, like everybody's food, our life, water, all that stuff depends on the rain. But to many people, it's like, I'm not going to lose my job if it doesn't rain for 6 months or something like that. But being out on the land, if it doesn't rain for 6 months, that's very, very significant. And we've been going through a pretty bad drought now. Like last winter was, all in winter was the worst my dad's seen. He's been there for 78 years. And it started out as this dry spring. So every time there's rain events like this morning and you're praying through that and you're going, believe that you're going to provide the rain. And then it's like we get a dusting of like 1/10 of an inch and it's okay. I still believe, but help my unbelief because I know you're going to provide, but it's really dry and the ponds are getting low. That wrestle and that struggle is very tangible whenever you're on the land. And that's a huge blessing because you didn't get that with the town job. I was like, oh, it's my performance that's going to keep my paycheck coming or whatever. It's not really. I mean, anybody could lose their job at any time. So we're all protected by God's grace and sovereignty, but it's just easier to see on the land. So I think that's been something that God's used agriculture to shape me in that. Another thing would just be knowing that you can't do it alone, and it takes community and people. That's something that Kaylin and I have been trying to be intentional about in the last few years, really probably since 18, of just pushing back against busyness, creating margin so that we have time if somebody calls and they need something or they need you or they just need to talk or whatever, and trying to create margin so there's space for life. Because that was when we were kind of doing like the speaking circuit, quote unquote, I guess, or whatever, in the regenerative world, and being more busy. It was just like everywhere you go, everybody's just busy, and that's the answer. How are you doing? Man, oh, I'm sure you're busy. Or we get that answer from people. I'm sure you're busy. I don't want to bother you. And that kind of just started grating on us. We're like, I don't want that to be the thing. Like, I don't want you to say, I'm sure you're busy. I'm really sorry to bother you. To be able to counter that with, I'm not actually, what do you need? And trying to create that space. And it takes a holistic approach to that, so figuring out how to shape your lifestyle to where you can do that financially and time as well too. So yeah, that we do it perfectly by any means, but trying to do that, trying to also invite people into our space to start creating that community. We joke now that we're kind of trying to repopulate East Bell County with young agrarians, but yeah,
it's a good goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's super cool. I think, just talking about the systems, how God has created things, and then viewing everything in that way, that with that regenerative mindset. Here we have at Feed My Sheep specifically, but Elizabeth Farm being an extension, we've got the saying that people matter. Mm-hmm. And I do think that's the beautiful thing about agriculture is to some people, they don't know anything besides the city. They don't know any other way of life. They don't know that there's a different option, a different way of doing things, a different way of seeing things. It is a very busy mindset. It's a mindset geared toward a specific set of things that you have to do. And I think that's beautiful that you saw. Yeah, it is. Yeah, the industrial age and the industrial mindset. But it takes away from some of those things that you were talking about having the time, having the view that people truly do matter, that the land truly does matter, and that God created it with a purpose. And it's not just to use at whatever expense that we think is, worth using it. So seeing people that way, it changes your whole perspective. You mentioned community. It's like you start to view everything differently. You start to view people as something that is a relationship to be cultivated, a person to be cared for, rather than what can I get from you or what can I use you for? It's like you start to see these things differently. So that's really profound. So I guess for people who aren't necessarily, we've talked about it a little bit and you mentioned some things, but that may not be aware of this term regenerative agriculture. What are some of the specifics? We've talked about the system, we've talked about viewing things differently, but what are some of the specifics that somebody who they could care less about agriculture, they say, oh, I get my food at HEB, that's all I need to know is where I'm getting my next grocery list at. What are some of the specific things of regenerative agriculture that can change people's minds in the sense of, oh, this is good for the planet, it's good for my family, and it's good for the community?
I think that I'm not good at succinct answers.
You don't have to be short.
But there's a whole lot, to that, because the financial aspect I know is a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that all leads into just a broken system that's going to take a lot of work to unwind. But I think once people maybe realize nutrient density and the health benefits from a whole food, our English language gets so watered down because of things. But so to try and define regenerative a little bit, to go back, it's trying to create a system or work within a system on the land that is regenerating. So the big engine that God provides for us is the sun. And so the energy being thrown at the earth, we're really in the sunlight business, like, to kind of boil it to simplistics. And so we try to have the most diverse population of photocells out there in the form of plants. So different leaf shapes, different leaf heights, different plant species and varieties that are all absorbing this free energy that's coming from the sun. And that photosynthesis process, they produce carbohydrates or sugar. That sugar is translocated down to the roots, usually during the night. And then the exchange that goes on in the soil, in a healthy living soil, is the microbes that have populated because there's a food source. They come, so if you build it, they'll come, kind of thing. And those microbes are exchanging. They're able to go in and get stuff like the micronutrients and things that are already in the soil. And they bring it to the table and they say, hey, plant, here's some, molybdenum and cobalt and whatever, all these micronutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen. Can I give you this for some sugar? And then it's like, yes. And then there's some excess sugars that are leaked out in the form of like the liquid carbon pathway. And so that carbon's being built. It's also being built by when those microbes die. There's leftover bits and pieces, and there's a whole, it's really fascinating world that we know very little about. And it's fascinating, even the little that we do know about, of the whole soil food web and all of those things. But as that builds more abundantly, and you're providing that system, the sugars, you build more health in the soil, and the more that's going to provide without the need for injecting synthetics into there. And so through a lot of mining of the nutrients that were there, so the Blackland Prairie was built by really good base material, and then years and years of the bison, tallgrass prairie, diverse, amazing plant life and life. But the huge herds of bison were probably the bigger. There was lots and lots of species of animals out there other than just the bison, but moving through, digesting those plants, pooping them out. So the entropy of that energy being broken up quicker through that, it just makes that nutrient cycle go faster. And they would also trample a bunch of it into the ground, but then they would move on and it would rest, and so it would regenerate. So we're trying to kind of mimic more of that natural process that was happening before, but we've extracted a lot of the nutrients down, so much so that growing up it was like, oh, if you didn't turn the fertilizer on, you weren't gonna, like, the corn would only grow 2 feet tall and not produce anything. And so you start believing that, oh, well, you can't grow corn without fertilizer. You can't grow corn without the nutrients, but there's other ways to get the nutrients back into the soil over time than just using the synthetics. So in a way, it's like propping yourself up on sugar and steroids, like, for your performance. And when that's yanked out, bad things happen to the body, of course. And so having a way to get out of that. That's the challenging part, because it does seem scary to pull out of that and to try to build natural health back. I feel like I've gone off and lost my train of thought.
No, that's perfect. No, because I think, and as you were talking, I was thinking just how to relate it back to, it is a system that God created, but it's reminding me of repentance in a way that, we've, as humans, we've fallen and we try to do things in our own way for whatever reason. Most of the time, speaking personally, it's prideful and arrogant reasons, but it's like we think that we know best, but just the things that you're explaining, it's like God created this. It's not something that you're forcing. Like, you may be able to manipulate some things to, mimic the natural environment, but it's all God's systems that he's put into place, and you're just helping them thrive. That's what it sounds like. And,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things on the human perspective that we're trying to do, and that we can always do a better job of doing, is like, okay, God has created this person, for whatever reason, they've chosen to go and do their own laundry list of things, how they want to do that. But we have a set of values and a set of created order that God has given us to say, if you do things this way, and not to get prosperity, not everything's going to go our way in life, but and that's why you have to trust. But it's, if you follow God, he promises that he will give you peace and joy and blessings. So it's just reminding me that when you follow God's way of doing things, and once again, this isn't to, we had this conversation, it's not to shame or condemn anyone on the agricultural side and, the conventional ways, but it is to show, like, hey, there is a way that is there that God put into place that works. And you've seen it work. You've seen other people who have made it work. And I think it's really cool because it is a complete regenerative system. But yeah, so you've talked about the system. You've talked about some different points of what regenerative agriculture is. What are you guys doing specifically on y'all's land? I know you said it's been in the family for a while. Y'all came back. And I know this, but just for everybody watching, what do you guys do currently to further that regenerative system?
Yeah. So to pick up the story, I guess, after 11 and learning some more of these things, we decided to stay on the farm. And so that early on meant, like, we were going to do row cropping differently. And when I say row cropping, I mean, like, basically planting corn in rows or cotton in rows, or the crops that are planted in rows. So we started doing no-till methodology and using cover crops in between the cash crops. But pretty soon, Gabe Brown became one of my good friends and mentors, and he did a lot of animal rotation into that. And so I was reading a lot more books on the subject and things, and learning about nutrient cycling and the importance of animals on the land and getting the animals back on the land, which had always been a part of the rotations in the older generations of the farm. The farm used to be diverse. And again, to bring back, like, I'm not faulting my dad. He was following the examples of the time. And if anybody wants to kind of see a good picture of, in the United States, the agricultural system and kind of the history of that, Wendell's nonfiction book, The Unsettling of America, is an excellent treatise of that whole thing. And that was our family. Like, that was going into post-World War II, and all of the modernization of the farms to maximize production, to extract as much as possible from the land. And so, no fault, to them. That was what was the best advice they were getting. Yeah, everybody was following that, or most people were. So we added animals in 13. We started direct marketing in 13, and we were doing grass-finished beef, pastured pork. We had about 100 laying hens. we added the sheep in 2015 to that to get more diverse products. So we had our own meat label, and ran that for, I guess till 2018. The decisions to move away from that were just kind of it was pretty exhausting, wearing a lot of hats. I mean, we had walk-in freezers. We had gotten some of those Bluebell truck boxes after the Listeria deal that Bluebell had. And some of those were fairly affordable, and set those up, but they're really hard to work on because they work on oil compression, and not a lot of people work on those around here. And so I had to learn how to repair my own freezers. And it was always like in the summertime when it's 110 degrees outside, and you'd go by the freezer and be like, is it okay? And there were a few times that it would quit, and then it would get to like 20 degrees in there. And it's like, what do we do if we can't get it back on before it gets above freezing? And we've got, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of meat inventory in there. So that, really, to be honest, social media was really wearing on us during that time too, because it went from enjoying a pasture walk with my wife to our brains thinking about, oh, is that a good picture for Instagram? And we could post a thing for Instagram, and then just the way the algorithm started working, and that like 2014 kind of had the endless scroll introduction and all that stuff. And so you had to be posting like all the time to be seen. And so it was just dragging everybody into that algorithmic world. And that was just, we're like, man, this sucks. We don't want any part of this. And just a few other things, were all happening. And so we decided we needed something we could cash flow a little more too, because we had a lot of land that we were caring for. By then we had given up the lease land that we were row cropping on for the most part, almost all of it, and went from 3,000 down to like about 400 acres. And one thing that a friend of Wendell's, Wes Jackson in Kansas, a statement he made one time that stuck in my brain was, you have to have your eyes to acres ratio right. And basically meaning that if you have too many acres that you can't care for, you can't see, and so you're not able to properly steward that. That was certainly the case whenever I was flying over, trying to get across 3,000 acres, within a week or something like that, and going, on a spray rig, driving 20 miles an hour, covering 175 acres an hour, and not seeing what I'm doing. I'm just killing stuff, and didn't care for it instead of knowing the land intimately. And sometimes I feel like the acreage now is almost more than, can really, really know intimately. And that's where, having other people and having more community helps that, more eyes to the acres kind of thing. So in 13, Dad retired. 14, we still did some crops with the things, but 15, Kaylin and I were walking in 14, and we were like, we're still, to create a monoculture, we're still having to use like herbicides to kill the diverse cover crops so that we can grow a monoculture for a cash crop. And we didn't know any riddle to fix that. And we're like, man, the blackland just wants to grow stuff. So can we just grow stuff and put it through animals and make a living on that? So that's when we decided to sell the row cropping equipment and invest more in sheep, because we were seeing then that sheep were a good fit for us. We really liked them. Cash flow cycles fast, easier to care for, less infrastructure. Nothing against cows. We still kept cows around for a little while, but then Dad kind of did that as a post-retirement love he liked, and we finished them. But then he got out a few years back, maybe 3 or 4, and so we've just been increasing the number of sheep since then from within. So we're here in 30 days or so, we'll probably have around just shy of 1,000 head on the ground.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Exciting times.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you mentioned community. As far as, I know you said y'all have got some people involved in what y'all are doing. Is there any way that our community here in Temple can support you or come out like what? I don't want to put that out on you. But is there any way that they can get involved either with y'all personally or, for just to continue these conversations? Like, how can people start to look at these things differently, start to, even if it's in a backyard, or if somebody, who's on the streets comes out to Elizabeth Farm, like how can we as a community continue these things, and how can that be for y'all personally and then just in general?
I'd go back to the challenge I gave to the farmers at that talk, was to what stirs your affections. So like start writing that down. And what about God's creation stirs my affections? And it may be pattern changes where we have to start thinking about things like go for a drive in the country or go to a park. Maybe it's grass, maybe it's flowers, maybe it's birds, things that are everywhere. And then just think through, like, how can that be cared for better? And then if there are farms that are doing those things, that promote those types of things, you can support them. If they sell product, I think one of the biggest things for us that was maybe, I gotta say this, but it was frustrating when we were selling like beef, for example. If we had found 20 families that would have committed to buying a whole beef from us once a year, we could have supported what we were trying to do. And so it was really frustrating to be like hitting all these farmers markets. We had like buying clubs in 9 different places at one time, and the consistency, I think, so that would be the challenge, is like go for commitment over convenience. So it's so easy to just be like, it's more convenient to just go buy what I need that night or whatever. But if you have a home, I know everybody can't do this, like apartment dwellers and things like that necessarily, but if you have a home, like a freezer is not that expensive. And then when you buy the meat in bulk like that, you can actually get it for a really good price for what you're getting, which gets back to the nutrient density. I won't go down that rabbit trail right now, but when those plants are getting all the food from the micronutrients and all the things from the microbes and from the system that God created to work, instead of just basically NPK in a form that's dumped out there, the plant that animal's eating is more whole, like nutrient wise. And then that animal therefore is healthier by eating that. And then in the instance of meat, so vegetables would be the same. Whatever you're eating, if you're eating the vegetables directly or eating the meat that came from an animal that was eating a diverse diet of healthy food from a diverse soil, it's more nutrient dense. And there's scientific studies now that you can go to and see the differences in that. Technology's catching up there. So if you buy, a steak that has half the nutrients of, steak A has half the nutrients of steak B, but steak A is twice as big. And then, so thinking about the nutrient density more than the quantity, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And so you need less of the really high quality nutrient dense stuff than you do of the other to feed yourself and nourish yourself well. And then the healthcare costs involved in that too. There's just really a lot of deeper ways to look through all the costs and stuff instead of just the face value, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But commitment, and then getting involved wise, like grow your own food as much as you possibly can, that way you're connected to it. And then if you can buy from somebody directly, that's great. But if not, try to look at the labels as best you can. I know they get confusing and mind spinning because that's kind of the game, but try to read labels, try to support as closely as you can regionally, and then be a part of a community. Like, as far as I know, you guys take volunteers. We don't really, I mean, the sheep do most of the work for us. So it's not where there's like vegetables and stuff like that require a lot more hands-on help and things. But we're trying to benefit the public good we're putting our land into conservation easements that will protect them from development as long as the government is intact. they won't ever be developed. And so there'll always be open spaces. That's part of the conservation goal in that. So open grasslands where people can drive down that road and see prairies and livestock and things like that. So bird wise, just so many more birds. I think we're up to like 85 different species that we've spotted and know, and we've got some slightly rarer ones that are coming back that birders are enjoying, and so that's things to enjoy.
Yeah,
people, but yeah, people can volunteer for you guys.
yeah, yeah. You hear that, guys? No, please come out. But yeah, no, I think that I know for me, like it's a total mindset shift, because you mentioned this earlier. It's like there are systems, unfortunately, in place now that just it makes it very difficult for some people to have access, especially for health foods. It's like, that's something that we're all trying to do, is to create more access to health foods so that we can have healthier people and healthier land and healthier everything. But it is sometimes it's difficult with the systems. But I think when you start, and you said focus on commitment. So I think that's what you said, focus on commitment. So committing your mind to seeing these systems differently, seeing them the way God created them, seeing them in light of health, right? Another thing you mentioned was, when you have healthy food, you can help offset the cost of healthcare, which, right now in our society, like we're heavily dependent upon the healthcare system. So when you start to view these things differently and you start to see them and you keep that mindset going of how can we help, how can we come together as a community and work on true lasting health, regenerative systems, sustainable systems, there's so much room for growth and beauty and development together. So I know that's one of the things that we are focused on doing. Speaking of volunteers, it's like, come out, see what we're doing, come out, go to, farms that are doing these things and taking these steps to better our community, because it truly does matter, and I know I mentioned this to you. It's like the more people I talk to who have this vision and have this goal, you can tell that they truly care. Like they truly have a passion for what they're doing. You have a passion for what you're doing, right? There's a real passion and a real need for these things. So getting involved on a communal level and really making these changes it's really important. So, but yeah, man, did you want to say something else?
I'll do that. I'll challenge churches.
Okay.
to feed their people better. Like, so we tend to feed kids junk food at youth events and things like that. And I know it's what the kids might want to eat, but like, why are we doing them any favors by pumping them full of sugar and just giving them junk food? So that's something I think if churches are able, we should really consider the quality of food that we're feeding kids, and also I think too food pantries and such. Like we tend to give people the leftover stuff or buy the cheapest possible thing. Yeah, and I understand that the thought is like you can get more quantity for less, and you can feed more people, and that's fine. I'm not saying don't do that at all, but maybe just give a little thought to giving someone something nutritious.
Yeah.
Well,
I think even having the conversations are important, because a lot of people don't know. Like if somebody donates something, or even churches, and that's something that we're trying to do is be a part of the educational aspect, teaching people like, hey, if you have an option of giving this or giving this, like absolutely give the healthy option, because, it's sad we've gotten, and this is one of the things, the potato chip initiative that we're doing at Elizabeth Farm. It's like, there's a story where a community group went out and they were donating some produce to a local school, and they went in and they brought potatoes, and this little boy, he said, I thought potatoes came in the form of chips. Like he didn't even know that a potato comes from the ground and it's grown in the ground. And it's sad, but that's where we are in society. So I think the educational aspect and absolutely viewing these things as God's creation, viewing food as God's creation, viewing people as God's creation. And then you start to get a little more incentive of, oh, maybe we should, treat these things better. Maybe we should treat people better in the form of what we feed them and how we, create these systems instead of letting it get to, once again, unfortunately, where we are today. But yeah, man, that's great. And thank you guys so much for what y'all do, because it really is important and it means a lot. And, I know we're excited to just to get to be a part of this process of growing and, continuing to create community and grow together. But yeah, we really appreciate it.
We need community more than ever.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on. And yeah. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Elizabeth Farm Podcast. For more content, follow us on your favorite social media platforms. Elizabeth Farm Podcast is a production of Red Cord Media, recorded in Temple, Texas. For more information on this and other podcasts, please visit redcordmedia.org.